Johnny Oram, and welcome to the premiere of Profiles, a program which will profile various figures in society, everybody from the common man and woman to some of the most powerful people in society. This is basically going to be a conversation about yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Today's guest is former mayor of Detroit, Dennis Archer. Mayor Archer served a stellar career, serving as the Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, and serving as the former mayor, of course, of Detroit, and serving as the president of the American Bar Association, as well as the National League of Cities, and becoming the chairman of one of the nation's largest law firms. Mayor Archer, thank you for being on the program today.
Johnny, delighted to be here.
Thank you. Mayor Archer, you've, again, as the introduction had indicated, you certainly had a stellar career, many accomplishments. However, let's start in the beginning. Let's backtrack. You were born in Detroit. You were raised in a rural community in Michigan. Can you talk to us about the town that you were raised in and about your childhood years growing up in that community?
Johnny, I was born in Detroit, and I lived in Detroit for 5 years, and I moved to Cassopolis, Michigan. But rather, they extended the village limits. I graduated in the largest class ever at the time, graduating from Cassopolis High School, of 79. It was a rural area. My dad had a garden in the back where we grew corn and vegetables and stuff like that. He worked for a gentleman by the name of Fern Westcott, who owned a tool and die shop in South Bend. My dad took care of Mr. Westcott's summer home.
Right.
I started working at the age of 8. My first job was a caddy on a golf course, and I went to set pins in a bowling alley, and did a number of odd jobs until I graduated from high school. And when I graduated from high school, I lied about my age to earn some money at a furniture factory before I started at Wayne State University in the fall. And they found out, of course, that I was too young, so I got fired. Came to Detroit and started working for a real estate company, painting houses. And then I stopped painting houses and worked for a gentleman who owned a drugstore. I was a stock boy at the Alhambra Drugs right there on Woodward Avenue. And then ultimately, I went to Henry Ford Hospital for my first white-collar job in the medical records department while I was going to school during the day at Wayne State.
Very good. Now, let me ask you, you said you live in Cassopolis. Was your family the only black family in town?
No, as a matter of fact, Cassopolis and Cass County was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And so there were a number of black families in the county as well as in Cassopolis, Michigan itself. One of the things that I found interesting, however, which was obvious to me, is that we had a one-block-long Main Street. We had a bank on one side of the street, bank on the other. We had two grocery stores, a Kroger and an A&P on the other side of the street. And we had a number of small businesses, but not one person of color ever owned a store or ever worked there, not as a clerk, not as a stock boy or anything. Nobody of color ever worked there. I did manage to, one of my odd jobs that I mentioned before was I did manage to work in a bakery. I got up about 4 o'clock in the morning, walked about a mile to our one-block-long Main Street in Cassopolis, and I swept and then I mopped the bakery floor. And I went back home, slept for about an hour, and then walked to high school.
Very good. Well, your parents taught you a lot of, important aspects of life, lessons in life. What are some of the most important lessons of life that your parents taught you growing up as a child?
Interestingly enough, my father had a third-grade education. He didn't go to school beyond the third grade, and before I was born, he lost his arm just above his left elbow in a car accident. My mother graduated from high school. They didn't have Americans with Disabilities Act back then, and as a result, even though in Cassopolis we had a couple of furniture factories, or one furniture factory, we had a couple of trailer factories. There was Studebaker Car Company was in South Bend, Indiana. There was trailer factories in Elkhart and the like. He couldn't get a job because he had just one arm, his right arm. But he worked as a caretaker, as I mentioned before, of Fern Westcott's summer home. And both my mother and dad made it very clear to me that despite the fact that we were poor, despite the fact that neither one of them had ever gone to college, I was going to go to college. They just made that absolutely clear that education was the absolute key. And thus, I benefited from their wisdom in that regard. I benefited from, when I went to school, at the time, this is how it was referred to, I knew my colors, I knew my numbers, all of that. I was well prepared when I started school. And I also had a very healthy respect for adults. I knew how to say yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir, and how to follow directions. And when I was in school, no matter whatever occurred, the teacher was always right. It didn't matter what it was, what they said, they were always right. And my mother would go up to school more than my dad. And when they went up for the parent-teacher conferences, and she went to the bulletin board, I better have something up there with my name on it and with a silver or gold star, whichever was top. I better have something up there, and I better not have the teacher suggest that I was doing anything that other than working very hard in the classroom. So they were both very good in that regard.
Certainly, your mom and dad seem to have been proud of you and all the accomplishments. And now with the education, can you talk to us about your education background and your first job after college?
Johnny, I started at Wayne State University, ultimately graduated from Western Michigan University. I worked my way through college. When I graduated, I started as a teacher in the Detroit Public Schools, became a tenured teacher. That was my first job following undergraduate school at Western Michigan University. And while I was teaching, the principal, her name was Violet Vardy. We were at the Bunch Elementary School. She felt that because I got along so well with my students, and my students really excelled, and I was teaching and learning disabled students, and because I got along with my fellow teachers, she felt that I would be an excellent principal. So she suggested I get a master's degree so that I could, at some point, earn the right to be considered as an assistant principal and then a principal. So I started back to get a master's degree, and I found that the two classes that I was taking to start that process of getting a master's, we used the same textbooks that I used at Western Michigan University. And I couldn't, for the life of me, understand why we're using the same textbook. So I was dating this teacher. We were at the same school. And I kept complaining about why am I taking these classes and using the same textbook. She said, why don't you go to law school? I said, law school? I said, I don't know anything about law. I've never been in a lawyer's office. I don't know what lawyers do. And the more I complained, the more she'd suggest I go to law school. So ultimately, I took the LSAT exam, which is an exam that's supposed to be a good indication whether or not you'd be successful in law school. Turned out that the exam suggested I'd be good in law school, so I went to Detroit College of Law, and I started going to law school at night while I was teaching during the day. And 4 years later, I graduated from law school. But along the way, I did the smartest thing I think I ever could have done, and that is I married the teacher who suggested I go to law school. So we will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary on June 17th of this year.
Happy anniversary to you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, you had the great honor and privilege to serve on the highest bench in the state of Michigan, serving in the Michigan Supreme Court. Can you talk to us and how you got to that role?
Well, Johnny, oddly enough, the year before I graduated, or that fall semester, I started in 1969 working in a campaign for Richard Austin, who was running for mayor of the city of Detroit. It was the first time that a person of color, Richard Austin was African American, had a legitimate chance of becoming mayor of the city of Detroit, and his campaign manager was a lawyer by the name of Robert Millender. He and my father-in-law served in the United States Army together. My father-in-law had a high regard for him. And Robert Millender and George Crockett and a number of other outstanding lawyers, Ernie Goodman and others, were in the only integrated law firm in the city of Detroit at the time. And so I thought that if I worked on the campaign and impressed Robert Millender that he might ask me to join his law firm. Turns out that we lost the election in a close race to Roman Gribbs, who went on to become an outstanding judge on Wayne County Circuit Court and on our Court of Appeals. And I did not get the job either, but I fell in love with politics. And from 1969, every year except we have one off year in the state of Michigan where we have no elections. So I just stayed very active, and I started helping other candidates run for office. And I even ran Mayor Coleman Young's first re-election campaign in 1977. I was campaign manager, and Robert Millender was the campaign director. He had oversight over everything, and I was his legs. And I enjoyed doing that, and worked with other candidates who ran for Supreme Court and the like. So that in 1984, I had been president of the National Bar Association, which is the nation's oldest and largest African-American bar association, from 1983 to 84. In 84, I became president of the State Bar of Michigan. I was its 50th president and the first person of color privileged to serve as president. And it turned out that we had, and James Ryan, who was on the Michigan Supreme Court, was nominated by the president to go on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and so it created a vacancy. And somebody called me when I was in Los Angeles taking depositions, and I returned the telephone call, and he asked if he could have my permission to advance my name to Governor James Blanchard to fill that spot on the Michigan Supreme Court. So I thought about it, and I said, sure. I didn't really think I had a shot at it. I didn't think I had a prayer. I thought it would be, if it somehow got leaked out that the governor thought enough of me to consider me for the Supreme Court, that would increase my standing with my clients and everyone else. But it turned out that the opportunity really did present itself, and when it did, I accepted it. And that was, I got that call in November of 1984, and in November of 1985, and in January of 86, I started serving on the Michigan Supreme Court.
Very good. Now, Mayor Archer, what led to your decision to become a candidate and then, of course, being elected mayor of Detroit? And if you could talk to us about your accomplishments and some of the hardships that you encountered during your mayoral administration.
Well, Johnny, I really enjoyed being on the Michigan Supreme Court. We had a lot of collegiality. The first Chief Justice that I served under was our former governor, G. Mena Williams. And then I served under our Chief Justice, Dorothy Comstock Riley. And when Chief Justice Williams couldn't run again because of his age, there was an election, and Robert Griffin, a former United States Senator, was elected. And we just had such great collegiality on the court. We never talked about, Johnny, whether or not one was a Democrat or a Republican. What we talked about was the law. What we felt the law was based upon what we read, based upon what all the past presidents were, and also looking at other state Supreme Court's rulings and the United States Supreme Court, and listening and looking at the statutes of the state of Michigan if that was something that was under consideration. But all the while I was reading about our children at that time who were killing each other or injuring each other over jackets and gym shoes. And that bothered me a lot. And it bothered me because businesses were leaving the city of Detroit. So I thought long and hard about it and felt that while I really enjoyed serving on the Michigan Supreme Court and what a high honor it was to have that privilege, I nevertheless felt that part of being a lawyer is a calling to public service. And so I felt that I could do and make a better contribution to Michigan if I could change some of the things that were happening in the city of Detroit. So I resigned from the Michigan Supreme Court, and I joined a law firm, Dickinson Wright, as a matter of fact. And then I ran for office, and it was a very hard-fought campaign. Mayor Young decided that he was not going to run again. There were 24 people who started out in that primary election, with two of us winding up confronting each other for the office of mayor, and that was Sharon McPhail. And she and I went head-to-head, and I was delighted that the citizens gave me the majority vote in the primary, at over 50% in the primary. And then, of course, I was delighted that the citizens gave me an opportunity to serve as mayor. And then when I ran the second time, I had 83% of the vote. It's an interesting opportunity, a great challenge being mayor. There were a lot of issues that you had to confront. I mean, for example, we had about 6 years of deficits. I inherited a deficit that was projected to be about $88.5 million. We whittled it down to about $53 million, rolling into a self-insurance firm, balanced the budget, and as we went forward every year in my administration, we seemed to have been able to get an upgrade in our bond rating, which saves the city money when we have to go and put bonds out and to build things or to rehabilitate or to use money for parks or for the cultural arts programs and the like. And we also had challenges before I got in with the issue of crime. But because of the great police department that I believed that we had and have in the city of Detroit, we were able to reduce crime every year that I was in office. And one of the things that was clear to me was that we needed jobs. You might recall, Johnny, that in the 1990 census had the city of Detroit with the highest percent of people living below poverty. At the time, it was like 32.3 or something like that, which when you factored it out, 46.6% of our children live below poverty. And despite the fact that the city of Detroit was and is considered the motor capital of the world, or at least of the United States, 35% of age-eligible adults in Detroit could not afford to own a car. So we needed to create jobs. And I came in January 1 of 1994. President Clinton was in office. He had started a hand-up policy towards cities. He and Secretary Robert Rubin, who was Secretary of Treasury, and Gene Sperling, who was the economic advisor to President Clinton, and then they had Secretary Ron Brown in Commerce and Secretary Henry Cisneros in HUD. We got together, all of us, both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, all came together, and they helped the city of Detroit win the Empowerment Zone designation in December of 1994, and worked with Governor Engler to create, as he created, the Renaissance zones. Between the Renaissance zones that Governor Engler created in Michigan and the Empowerment Zone that was developed by President Clinton and Vice President Gore, it gave the city an enormous opportunity to lift itself up. Then when you add to that combination the great business community that we have in the metropolitan area of Detroit, namely Detroit Renaissance and Detroit Regional Chamber, the business community came together. And when the business community came together, they created, frankly, thousands of new jobs. For about 3 years in a row, Detroit was cited in Site Selection magazine as the city that led the nation in terms of creating new jobs, new businesses, etc. And the community itself, the neighborhoods, they came out, and every year we had a fabulous cleanup. First year I was in office, one of the challenges that I had was that I think we were a little bit lax on the 3-day period, which was called Devil's Night, and we didn't have enough volunteers. But the second year that the Devil's Night came around, we changed it to Angel's Night because we had so many volunteers out. We suppressed all the fire, and every year that I was in office, we suppressed the fires and the like, and so we have an Angel's Night. And so those are the kinds of things that happen in a city, but it takes leadership, much like you, Johnny. You decided you wanted to give back to your community, so here we are on your premier television show.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Mayor Archer, Thurgood Marshall,
Yes.
Otis Smith, Anna Diggs Taylor, all being the first people of color to serve in their respective roles in the judiciary, with Justice Marshall in the U.S. Supreme Court, Otis Smith in the Michigan Supreme Court, and Judge Taylor in the U.S. being the first black woman to serve in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. There was a first for you. You were the first person of color to serve as the president of the American Bar Association. Can you talk to us about that important milestone in your life, considering that the ABA had a policy against admitting blacks in most of its history?
Yeah, you're very accurate in all of that, Johnny. That is to say that the American Bar Association, since its founding, would not allow black lawyers, or lawyers of color for that matter, to be members. Back in 1908, somehow 3 then, quote, Negroes or colored lawyers managed to join the association. And right after that, they changed their policy. The ABA changed their policy immediately. And you had to list your ethnicity on the membership application. And so if they didn't recognize a name, if they saw a name and they said, Dennis Archer, who's Dennis Archer? If they didn't recognize, they would go to the lawyer's office to make sure that the person who was applying to become a member of the American Bar Association was not a black lawyer or a lawyer of color. And so that policy stayed in place until 1943. And the first person that we believe to join the American Bar Association was former Secretary of in the Cabinet, William Coleman. And that was back in 1948 when he was a Supreme Court Justice, a law clerk to the United States Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. And then people started trickling in, but it wasn't really until 1971 when a lawyer who was the president-elect of the American Bar Association, Chesterfield Smith, came to the National Bar Association annual meeting in 1971 in Atlanta and encouraged and asked the National Bar to please come to the American Bar Association annual meeting next year, that the National Bar had created a seat in the policy-making body of its House of Delegates, a seat designated for a member of the National Bar. Edward F. Bell, who was a judge of the Wayne County Circuit Court at the time, was president in 1971, and in 1972, he went to San Francisco, as I did, to go to our first meeting of the American Bar. I went as a young lawyer, and he went in to participate in the House of Delegates. And when I went to that meeting, I just left our annual meeting of the National Bar in Miami, where there were just several thousand African-American lawyers, and I went to the Young Lawyers meeting at the Stanford Court Hotel on Nob Hill in San Francisco, and there were hundreds of outstanding, very talented young lawyers, mostly white, and they're all white, except for 2 of us, myself and a lawyer who was there, who was a member of the United States Army. He was a sergeant. He was recruiting to the JAG Court, a Judge Advocates Court, and I was there to participate. And there were very few women, and there were just the 2 of us who happened to be lawyers. And so I had a choice to make. The choice was, do I stay within and try to bring about the change that I felt was important, or return back to the National Bar and criticize the American Bar for not being open? So I decided to stay both in the National Bar and in the American Bar, and I was fortunate enough to be president of both organizations.
Well, that's just wonderful. Well, Mayor Archer, I really thank you for being a guest on the premiere of Profiles. It's been a pleasure having you today on
Johnny,
this program.
thank you. I look forward to watching you, and I can only imagine the kind of outstanding people that you will have on your show. And let me know at some point. Maybe you'll invite me to come back again in a year or so.
Love to have that opportunity. Thank you again. Well, on behalf of all of us at the Public Access Promotions Committee and the Southwest Oakland Cable Commission, I'm Johnny Oram. Until next time, farewell.